Hi, everybody. Welcome to CCTV, Channel 17, live at 525, the Preservation Burlington show. I put the cue cards in the wrong area, so that's why I'm looking all shifty. Preservation Burlington's a nonprofit 501c3 organization whose mission is to preserve and protect the historic architecture and livability of Burlington through education and advocacy. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in. This is our monthly call-in show. We'll be posting the phone on the screen in a little bit, but I'd encourage everybody to call in with any questions. This month, like I often do, I drag friends, peers, and co-workers into the show to talk about preservation trades and the different aspects of old buildings and the challenges we face and what we do every day. And this month, I tricked my friend Larry Rebecki to come onto the show and tell us all a little bit more about 50-something years of restoring stained glass windows and creating stained glass windows, and it's a long time.
Yes, it is.
So
you remember the old Maine joke about have you lived here all your life? The answer is not yet.
Not yet. So you've been here for a really long time, but not the full time yet. So, Larry, thanks for coming and doing the show.
You're welcome.
It's been a little while since I've got Dave Ocalita doing historic masonry stuff, and it's just fun. People really like these kind of things. I don't know if we'll get any call-ins. We usually only get callers when we have somebody from the zoning office on, because people are mad. So when they're not mad, they don't call in. But so you're on Pine Street. Oh, I got to say, when I was 1998, I was thinking of moving up here, and I came up to visit the town and see what it was like, and walked around a little bit. I got lunch in what used to be the cheese outlet, and your shop was on next door on that side of Pine Street at the time, and I wandered in with my partner at the time, who was a stained glass aficionado, and I was super impressed. And I gotta say that between the lunch there and your shop and the stuff that you did and the craft that was going on in Burlington convinced me that I wanted to live in Burlington. So,
really?
Yeah, so thanks.
You're going to blame me for that?
I'm going to blame you for that.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
So you're on the other side of Pine Street now, but so how long have you been plying your trade in the south end of Burlington?
I can give you the 90-second history. I started in life as an electrical engineer. I graduated with a degree in that from MIT in 1969. And I was hanging out in Boston waiting for my girlfriend to graduate from a different school. And I took up stained glass as a hobby, and I was selling a few things. I would sell them at Haymarket, which was then called Haymarket. It wasn't the Faneuil Hall Restoration that it later became. So Saturday mornings I'd make some small things. I'd put them in a briefcase. I'd travel to the market on the MTA, and I would set up a card table and sell some stuff. A couple of years later, I'm in Vermont trying the same thing, selling stuff at craft fairs. And it was okay. You could sell pretty much anything I made. It was, the 70s.
Yeah.
People weren't very discriminating, which was a little bit dissatisfying in the end, because it didn't matter how much or how little thought I put into something, I'd still sell it.
Right. It would sell.
Yeah. So eventually a Catholic priest asked me to repair a buckling church window. And I tried to put him off. I said, I don't know how to do that. And he said, well, I don't know anybody else. Could you try to learn? Okay, well, early orientation as an engineer kicked in. When you look at why did something fail, it failed for a series of reasons. There's always a cascading chain of failures. And rather than get all scientific about it, I looked at the window. I said, well, the wood has buckled. It's got soft and rotted. That's enabled the glass to slump down. And by the way, all these little joints in the metal are broken. And eventually I figured out the first failure was the wooden sash. The second failure was probably the window getting out of plane, water accumulating in the cracks in the lead. Lead came, as it's called. The third failure was probably corrosion caused by galvanic corrosion. I wasn't a chemist, but my dad was. So I understood dissimilar metals in a wet environment are going to corrode faster.
Right, each other.
There's always one that's the anode and one is the cathode. Lead and tin are very close together in what they call the table of electromotive forces. I can't remember the name of the table, but there's like 10 millivolts difference between their potential. But you give something 100 years in a wet environment, and the joints would get eaten away.
Yeah, right.
Very curious. The lead would become porous and break, and then failures would become quick, and the window would buckle, get out of plane.
Yep.
And so
You have
to
gravity
remediate,
working against it.
yeah, to remediate all this stuff, you have to. The worst case, you take the window apart and rebuild it. There are other things you can do to make the window survive if it's not that far gone. And there's a whole. I don't want to get too deep into the.
But this is what happened to you. You got this deep into it because somebody asked you to. What happened to electrical engineering? You just threw that away?
I wasn't passionate about it. I mean, I was a kid. I wanted to make things with my hands. I wanted to build radios. I wanted to. I remember the night I picked up the Voice of Moscow on my home-built shortwave receiver, and I'm going, Mom, Dad, I've got these Russians. And I picked up the Voice of America, and I didn't realize that was easy. Those stations were blasting out propaganda at fantastic wattages. But when I got to school, it wasn't nearly so much fun. So
you basically got tricked into the preservation trades.
No, it wasn't really that. Glass is. I had been because of I had a kind of a churchy childhood, a Catholic schools all the way until college, and I had been pretty well educated in the classics and in art by a particularly terrific high school experience with the Jesuit fathers, and they were really they were brilliant. They were head and shoulders above what I expect today of the most Catholic clergy. They were among them historians, writers, architects, classicists, seismologists, biologists. They were the people who taught me calculus and French and all kinds of stuff, and too much Latin. So
yeah, that comes in handy.
But when you get a sweep of world development of art, I became really fascinated. And one of those teachers sent his high school class to a different museum in New York City every month for the several years that we had him as the art teacher. And we were teenage boys. We whined and we complained. We had to go to the Frick and the Guggenheim and MoMA, and we had to go to museums all over New York City. We had to write reports. And when I saw the cloisters, it was a gobslap. It was gobsmack. That's what I'm trying to say. I speak British
All
very
the
well.
above, right?
But so I looked at these windows, and it was like, these things are from the year 1100.
Right.
And they're still with us.
Yeah.
And they're still talking to us.
Yep.
They're still showing their times and their history. Now, 80% of their history, at least, was religious. But I knew how to read those windows. I knew what they're trying to say. And about 20% of them were private residence windows and merchants' windows. Merchants in the 14th century and later got wealthy. There was a merchant class that sprung up in the north of Europe, and these people had money to put fancy
stuff
in their houses.
Yeah.
Before then, it was castles for the nobility and churches for everybody else.
Yeah.
But when I saw pictures from Amsterdam of ships loading barrels at the dock. That was a Dutch merchant who just wanted to look at a picture of his ship every day in stained glass. So I thought, this is really great. This is living history. Somebody's eyes 500 years ago looked at this stuff. And that's what hooked me. It's not like something you make with the latest electrical engineering technology is going to be obsolete 5 years from now, if you're lucky.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. Somebody was just asking me the other day, like, why do I do what I do? And I tell everybody I don't know, but I do know, and you articulated it better than I struggled to the other day. But it's like, it's not the thing that I'm doing, whether the woodwork or recreating a thing and matching something. It's matching something that somebody else years ago did and did well, and now I feel the challenge to try and to acknowledge that, keep it going, and somehow honor that tradition that they were doing, because it's hundreds and hundreds of years of people using relatively simple materials to make amazing art, especially in your case.
Modern houses are much, much more efficient machines. Houses built today, they're so much more wise in their use of energy, and they're so much more equipped with wires and cables and all kinds of, people build new houses with fiber optic cables for the next generation built into the walls. Unfortunately, a lot of people get into those houses and they feel like something is missing, and they're looking for little nostalgic grace notes from the past. So we come along and somebody wants a window that would have been appropriate in Queen Victoria's time.
Right.
You probably have run into a lot of windows in Burlington houses, certainly in the hill section, but also in St. Johnsbury, in St. Albans, all the older towns in Vermont where there were wealthier neighborhoods. And houses were built with stained glass windows. A lot of those windows were called merchants' windows or builders' windows, because studios in the 1900s that were building windows for churches didn't have a commission all the time, but they had to make payroll.
Yep.
So they made a lot of windows, and a lot of these shops in Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, Brooklyn, where there were a lot of immigrants, particularly German and English immigrants who came with the trade, they would build windows, they put them in catalogs. Some builder could look at number 73.
I want that.
I want that, and then it says right here in the catalog it's going to be 37 inches wide and, yay high.
Yep, they could build right to it.
And a month later it's going to show up, probably shipped by Railway Express, because that's how stuff moved in those days,
Yeah.
before trucks. And those windows went into houses all over, builders' windows. So they weren't custom designed for those houses.
Right. Or the people in those houses. Right. That's
So I brought some glass samples to show you.
yeah. Let's hold them up so people can see the light.
Okay, so back in the Middle Ages, up till about 1880, most of the glass used in stained glass windows was this stuff. This is so-called antique, which means blown glass.
Yep.
And you see the bubbles and the streaks and the lines. That was made by somebody blowing a bottle.
Yep.
This is from Germany.
So this is like and cylinder glass or something.
Cylinder glass.
Cut it, score it, and then let it lay flat.
Yeah,
in
and
an
they're
oven.
still doing that at 2 or 3 companies in Europe, mostly Germany and France.
Yep. Look at my face. Look at my face through it on the screen. Ooh, I look better. I look better. That's great.
So about 1880 comes along a new process. Now this stuff was European, it was expensive, and it was made in all kinds of colors. Metallic salts were added to the glass. You could get red, yellow, blue, green.
That's how they get the color?
Yeah, cobalt and selenium for the reds and yellows, and gold for the pinks, and magnesium and manganese, and every element in the periodic table could make a different color. So along about 1880, the great age of steam-driven machinery, somebody figured out you could make glass by pouring molten glass out of a furnace as a kind of I'll call it a plastic. It's not solid yet, and it's probably about 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And it can be poured out on a table. You can have a big machine with steel rollers geared together, cooled by water inside them, driven by chains and gears. And you can make a lot of glass very fast, and it's called rolled glass. So they made all these different glasses. This is an example of a rolled glass, and this is one of probably 2,000 types that are in current production at Kokomo, Indiana, Kokomo Glass Company.
I'm looking for the camera that's looking at it. There we go.
So Kokomo,
Oh, wow.
Kokomo is America's oldest glass company, as is the Paul Wismar Company in Virginia. They're both America's oldest glass companies.
Where's Kokomo?
Kokomo is in Kokomo, Indiana.
Oh, okay. Cool.
That's oddly enough because they named it after the place.
Yeah, that was very creative.
So what that process did is it produced glass of even thickness, because the roller's going to control the
Right, that
spacing.
squeezes it basically.
Yeah, and you could make all kinds of interesting things. You could put some textures on the rollers.
Oh, that's how
this.
they do that.
Watch that you don't get cut on that, because that's going to have sharp edges.
Oh, I'm going to get cut.
That's called a ripple.
Wow.
And one roller could be textured.
Wait. There we go. Look at that. Wow.
That's called a ripple. One roller could be textured.
This is really a heavy texture.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other side's pretty smooth.
And the other side had to be smooth so the artisans could cut it. You couldn't cut it
Yeah, you can't run
I mean, the age of diamond bladed bandsaws didn't come along till 20 years ago.
Right.
Well, 50 years ago for the industry, but 20 years ago for studios the size of mine. And companies that did that, they had trouble selling it. They couldn't figure out how to get artisans to buy it. Artisans thought it was inferior material because it was 1/4 the cost of European blown glass. How could it be any good?
Yeah.
But they had to have a name for it, so they called it cathedral glass.
Genius.
Cathedral glass.
Genius.
And that boosted the sales a little bit. And they also discovered that with the same machinery could make opalescent glass. This is opal glass.
So, and now this is smooth both sides.
Yep, but you can get opalescent glass that's textured as well. The difference is the chemistry. Opalescent glass has a lot more alumina salts in the sand.
And that's what makes it so...
Gives it an opacity.
Yeah, yep.
So if you want privacy, if you want a window that's for a bathroom, or if you want to paint a picture of a scene, if you want to make hills and trees and birds and forests and skies and all that other good stuff,
opaque glass.
opalescent glass is much more of a painter's material. So the companies that turned out cathedral glass turned out opalescent glass. At one point, somewhere around 1910 or 20, there were probably 30 companies just east of the Mississippi making this stuff.
Now that's kind of coordinating with the whole arts and crafts movement, right?
Yeah.
It's about to kick in.
Yeah. And then comes the Great Depression. Bambi meets Godzilla. The great majority of those companies are not with us again anymore today.
Yep.
Kokomo survived, and the answer they would give you when asked is, our founders were German and were stubborn. So they weren't going to give up.
Right.
They weren't going to give up because they were going dead broke. And the Wismar company similarly. And they were also, Paul Wismar is a German founder of the company.
Right.
So
Tenacious.
they're still cranking out glass today.
Oh, funny.
Now prices have risen a lot because of distribution costs and energy costs, but we can buy, on today's market, we can buy probably 4,000 or 5,000 kinds of colored glass.
Wow.
From distributors that stock it in warehouses, or we can buy it directly from the companies.
So this is turning. I'm going to turn it into a little commercial for Rebecca Studios.
No, you're not.
So, well, I've seen your warehouse and I've seen your sample shelves in the shop. I think I took a picture earlier when I was there. But you've got hundreds of types of glass available, right? At any time during any day, almost, right? So.
Yeah, we have probably between 600 and 1,000 types of glass, of which about 400 are pretty much steady products that we try to stock. The rest of it is shards and fragments, and this person came in from East Hardwick and they gave us the stuff that was in their basement and we put it in the warehouse. We have a section called the Glass Museum, which is just, we don't know where it came from. It doesn't have a stock number.
We got a picture up front
here. We have a piece this big, and that's it.
And that's the one. If you want it, that's it. You can't get any more.
But so when you've been in the trade this long, I know a lot of people who make a living with this craft. You'd be surprised how many.
Yeah.
And of those people, there are probably, I would say 20 or so who do repair and restoration work in the state. And I say, may God have mercy on their souls.
Well, there's not a lot. I find the same thing. There's not a lot of competition, right? People, for some reason, it just there's not a lot of people out there. Like that first Catholic priest that said, "Well, I can't find anybody else. Would you learn how to do it?" Yeah. Well, and you did.
I try to help people solve problems, but the people that are making a living get my real respect. And so. If somebody comes in and I've got something in the Glass Museum that was given to me for free, I'll just give it to them if it can help them.
Right.
But if if it's something we buy from a distributor or a manufacturer, then we have a set commercial price. So sheet glass comes in sheets that can be 10 square feet or down to about 4. Pretty big sheets.
Yeah.
And we cut them in pieces to sell parts of them to the trade. The trade is everybody from hobbyists to cottage professionals. It's a term the Vermont Department of Labor and Industry came up with. Cottage professionals.
Cottage industry.
That means you're working in your garage or your basement.
Yep.
But they're all delightful people, and some of them are discovering the craft for the first time. And that puts me in touch with the delight I felt when I...
Can you trick them into being restoration people?
I wish I could. Sometimes if I see somebody going in that direction, I won't try to discourage them.
Right.
I'll just explain that you can't ever match all things.
Right. Never tell them how hard it really is.
It really is.
But with 1,000 different types of glass. So if you get a church window in, so you mentioned, some of them might be able to be repaired. Often when they're really far gone or sagging and everything's given up the ghost, then it's a complete rebuild. So tell me how you do that a little bit. So you take the whole thing apart?
Yeah, you had some pictures that I showed you, one of which you might have on your computer. I don't know. It was a picture of a window at the Methodist Church in Georgia.
Yep.
Held together by duct tape.
Yeah. We'll pull that up.
Duct tape is the official Vermont repair material.
There we go. There it is.
See, now
look at that. It's structural duct tape.
I talked to Governor Dean one time. He was in my shop when I was repairing a paperweight that the National Press Club had given him. It was a little stained glass sailboat on a pedestal. And I told him if he'd stay and visit with me, I would fix it. Well, he waited, and he did, and his wife was there too. That was great. But at the end of the repair, he said, "What do I owe you?" And I said, "Well, you don't owe me anything, Governor, but what I really want is a proclamation from the Vermont State House declaring that duct tape shall be the official repair material of the state of Vermont, henceforth and forever." And that blighter left office without doing that.
He didn't do that for you?
He didn't do that. So duct tape is unofficial.
But you're right, rest assured that it is, in fact, the official repair material of Vermont.
So when you have a window falling apart, you duct tape it if you think it's going to disintegrate on the way to your shop. And that's what that picture shows.
Okay, so you're holding that thing together to get it back to your shop.
Yeah, then we have
you can take it all apart.
We have a template for the opening it's supposed to go into, or some measurements. Round tops and Gothic tops.
They're the fun ones.
They're harder to make templates for. Rectangles, if the house is an old house, it could be out of square.
Right, it's a rhombus.
Yeah, and but you have some kind of goal that you're building it to a certain size and shape. You need a rubbing of the line plan. Mostly a window, if it's that far gone, the lead came is all rotted and corroded. It gets taken off there. It gets put in buckets. We take it to a recycling center. Don't want to put it in the landfill.
Right.
And we clean the glass, and we make it's called a cartoon. It's an actual lead line drawing. And they differ. That's called a cut line in the UK. I don't know what it's called in France. In Canada, it's called a lead line. We call it a cartoon, which is just a line plan, but done with heavy enough lines that you have spacing between the glass.
You know what the cane will be. So
yeah. Yep. And then you put that together on a workbench, and the traditional tools are a couple of wooden cleats to hold everything to size as you're building it. There is such a thing as a glass hammer. And it's
It doesn't sound like those two things should go in the same sentence.
A glass hammer we have a couple of them. They're very funny. They're a little hammer with one face of it is a hard rubber face, the other one is a hard plastic face. And they're designed to give a gentle tap. We also have tools called lathkins or fids, which are tapered pieces of hardwood. They can be used to push on things, or you can put it against some piece of glass that you're trying to force into the cane, and you can tap it.
Tap the fid.
The glass hammer.
Okay.
And then you drive a couple of nails to hold it. Eventually you have the whole thing together, and then you solder all the joints. And at that point you're ready for grouting, we call it cementing, which is a very messy process.
Right. I've seen you after that. You've shown up for, the home audience doesn't know we dog walk every day together, but you've shown up like covered in dust.
My dog can lick your dog any day.
Yeah, my dog is going to kick your dog's butt.
Okay. So,
so you've showed up after your cementing thing. So what?
It's powdered chalk that you're looking at on my clothing. If I haven't been careful, I try to wear a respirator and gloves. And the grout is a medieval inspired grout. It was actually written down in Latin by a monk probably in the 1170s in Paris. And there's a lot about the craft that we know because of a guy we don't know his real name. He wrote under the name Theophilus, which is Greek for the lover of God. And Theophilus was, to borrow the expression from my Jewish friends, he was the original nudge. Went around asking the artisans, the stone workers, the iron workers, the carpenters, the glass workers, hey, mister, why are you doing that? How are you doing that? Show me the tools. Can you tell me how? And eventually, when he exhausted the masons, they'd kick him out and he'd go bother the glass workers.
Yeah.
He wrote it all down in a journal, but nobody else did. Nobody else ever did. So you come to the book called The Various Arts, which was translated probably a number of times into different languages. I got a hold of a copy with some translations made by a California glass worker in the 1970s, and they had the recipe for the grout. We all use that today. We put it up on our website. So you can make the mud. It gets into the grooves between the glass and the lead.
Yep.
And then it hardens up. And it's a wonderful technique because it seals the window. It eventually gets hard enough in a 24 or 48 hours. The window gets very stiff. It polishes the glass. The powdered,
because you've got to clean it all off, right?
yeah, and the powdered chalk that we use to dry up the grout is just abrasive enough to give the glass a beautiful shine, but not enough to scratch the glass. So, and it's all very labor intensive.
Yeah. How's your elbows?
My elbows, I don't know. But the thing is, there's no conceivable way you can do this with automated machinery. There's no CNC, there's no 3D printer. There are ways of using cheap labor or using, there are water jet cutters, and I know of companies doing that.
Right.
There's an awful lot of, there was up till a few years ago, an awful lot of cheap Tiffany imitation stuff coming out of China. And we looked at it with dismay because most of the designs they weren't really heartfelt designs. They were
Knockoff.
misunderstood interpretations of the original Tiffany idea, particularly the lamps, and they were poorly made with cheap materials. So but you know, after building maybe a dozen fancy lampshades in my time, I realized there was no better way to lose money than building Tiffany lamps.
Yeah.
So I know of one woman in Montreal who builds $10,000 lamps. She builds about 6 per year.
Yep. Yep.
You know,
So
I mean, you might as well build violins. You're at work.
Yeah.
You're working at the other end of the trade than where I work.
Right.
But my preference is windows because windows are alive with light.
Yeah. Yep. I know people could drive by. Another pitch, you know, as we're starting to wind down. But you did those windows for, you know, not restoration oriented, but you do a lot of design work as well. People come to you and ask you to do things, and you did, for the heck of it, I think, the advanced music. Can people still drive by advanced music and see your windows?
They're better to go in there.
Yeah.
You know, you can see a stained glass much better from inside.
Right, with the light
Their
behind
instrument showroom has 3 of my windows, and their classroom has 1.
Okay.
And I for some reason, better known, I don't even know why I did it. I wanted to make a picture of Duke Ellington at his piano, probably because my parents loved that kind of music, and I can still hum "Take the A Train." Right. And so I put a subway train into that window, 3 foot by 4 foot window.
Yeah, they're huge.
And then I started thinking about other musicians of that era. So Billie Holiday in her blue dress, with the blue moon outside the window. What a tragic, sad, wonderful singer. And then eventually we got around to Benny Goodman. Don't ever try drawing a clarinet.
I am not. Look, I'm writing that down right now.
I did Louis Armstrong as well.
Yep.
Because he was such a. So it was a way of telling stories. If you look at Louis Armstrong's life, he began as a poor orphan, arrested for vagrancy, thrown into a home.
Yep.
Where he blew everybody's doors off with the way he could play music.
Yeah.
So 50, 60 years later, I found some pictures of Louis sitting with some young boys who were African-American boys, and he's teaching them to play the trumpet. I said, no, this is a very rounded...
You're like, this has to be in a window.
It's a very rounded life story.
Yeah.
Anyway, this guy from Washington, D.C. wanted a window celebrating the Delta blues guitar style. And I spent a lot of time looking at pictures and reading. I bought a few books looked at a lot of library material. My old friend Peter Brown had a big library. He's a music professor and classical musician, and his widow's a friend of mine. She shared all of his stuff with me. And I just eventually figured out that the most charismatic face belonged to Mississippi John Hurt.
Yep.
The older men are easy to do, particularly when you're dealing with African Americans, because you can't paint them you can't add paint to dark glass.
Right. Yeah.
So
you said earlier.
that's what that window is about.
So people can come. So we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you for coming on, because we can go on for another hour easily. People can stop by the shop. It's not an ad for Rebecca Studios, but they should walk in there and you could show them that window because it hasn't shipped yet, right?
Going to be here for another month.
Another month. So if anybody wants to go see some of Larry's, design work, and it's really amazing, and also just the collection of glass you have in the studio. Say it.
Well, it's pretty good. One of the absolute best things about my studio is that in 2001, August 2001, a young woman came into my shop as a candidate to be hired. That's Emily Stone King. And Emily was running a photo store in downtown Burlington, looking for a change. And she became, over the next 20 years, probably the best helper apprentice that I ever had. Most original, the one who could figure things out, one that could deal with people, could deal with money, fun to be around. And eventually, she was going to take a job. She was applying for a job in England she wanted to go to York Cathedral, York Minster. In York, England. She wanted to become a docent and conservator. And she asked me to write a recommendation. I said, yeah. But I felt sad.
Yep.
And then she never applied because her husband didn't want to move to England. And I realized at that point, I'm going to fall apart it's like my daughter. I'm going to fall apart if I don't have her in my shop. So now she's a partner.
21 years ago.
Yep, and she now owns part of the business, and I have to shut up and listen.
That's not easy for you.
I love it. I just love it.
Larry, thank you for doing the show. They're going to come in, they're going to see Emily, and tell people, don't get into restoration. Thanks, everybody, for tuning into CCTV Live at 525 and the Preservation Burlington show. For more information on Burlington history, our tours or events, or a marker for your house, go to preservationburlington.org, and we'll see you next month with somebody else that I can trick into being on the show. Thank you. Thanks, Larry.
You're welcome.